Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that doesn't fit neatly into words. It's the kind of story that lingers in your throat somewhere between a sigh and a scream. You probably won't survive this story without feeling something heavy pressing against your chest. It's about love that turns into regret and kindness that turns into a knife in your back. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. I still remember the day I first saw her. It was raining, that soft, reluctant kind of rain that makes every sound in the world quieter, like the universe is listening. The orphanage smelled of wet wood and disinfectant. Children huddled near the window, their faces pressed against the glass, waiting for someone who might never come. She wasn't one of those waiting faces. She sat apart, tiny thin, with hair that curled at the ends and eyes that didn't blink much. When she finally looked up at me, it wasn't with curiosity or fear. It was defiance, the kind that hides a deep ache. The social worker said her name softly as if it might shatter Lena. She was 8. She'd been there for 3 years, abandoned after her mother, my story's ghost, had been arrested for theft. She doesn't trust easily, the woman said, but she's clever, a fast learner. I didn't care about any of that. I saw something in her, something like myself when I was younger, before life taught me about loss. I thought, if no one else will give her a home, I will. People still debate whether love can truly rewrite someone's past or if it simply buries it under softer memories. Bringing her home felt like rewriting my own life. The house had been too quiet since my husband died, every sound echoing in the emptiness. That first night, Lena sat on the couch, hugging her knees, her small suitcase beside her like a shield. I made hot cocoa too sweet, and she didn't drink it. I told her she could pick her room, but she just whispered, "I'll sleep where the light reaches." So I left the hallway lamp on, and she curled up on the couch. At midnight, I heard soft footsteps. She had crept into my room and stood beside my bed, silent. I didn't say anything, just lifted the blanket, and she slipped under it like she'd always belonged there. The next morning, she smiled for the first time. Not a big smile, just a small corner of her mouth turning up like sunlight sneaking through clouds. I remember thinking that this was it, the beginning of something right. The neighbors came to meet her. Mrs. Hall from next door brought a pie, pretending not to be nosy. "Oh, she's adorable," she said, her eyes flicking to the adoption papers on my kitchen counter. I told her Lena was shy, still adjusting. Mrs. Hall nodded, lowering her voice to whisper, "You're brave to take in another woman's child. People these days barely take care of their own." I just smiled politely, but the words clung to me like static. That night, I tucked Lena into her new room, the one with the window facing the old oak tree. I told her that if she ever felt scared, she could count the tree's branches until she fell asleep. "But trees die," she said, matter-of-factly. I froze for a second. "Yes," I said finally, "but some take 100 years to fall." She didn't respond, just rolled over and whispered, "I don't want to die." It broke me a little hearing that from a child. I wanted to promise her she'd never be alone again. So I did. I promised. Weeks turned into months, and her laughter began to echo through the halls. She'd make up songs about the cat steal cookies from the jar and chase the mailman down the driveway shouting, "You forgot my letter." There was no letter, of course. She just liked the idea of someone sending her one. It reminded me how much children crave proof that they're remembered. That's a fact most people forget about family life. Children don't need luxury, they need to know they matter. But there were moments, small, quiet ones, that unsettled me. I once found her staring at my jewelry box, her fingers tracing the edge of the gold bracelet my late husband had given me. "It's shiny," she said, not looking at me. "It's from someone you loved." When I nodded, she asked, "Does it still belong to you if they're gone?" I laughed lightly, trying to diffuse the odd weight of the question. "Of course it does. That's what memories are for." She didn't laugh. She just whispered, "My mom said memories are lies we tell ourselves." I didn't know how to answer that. Still, I told myself she'd learn that love would soften whatever the past had done to her. I even read somewhere an article about attachment disorders, that children who experience early trauma often test their parents to see if love will still stand. That made sense to me then. So when she started hiding things, little things like spoons or toys, I didn't punish her. I just put them back quietly and tell her I wasn't mad. But love isn't always the cure. Sometimes it's the test itself. Looking back now, I think that first day the rain wasn't washing anything clean, it was warning me, a cleansing storm before the long drought. People still debate whether taking in someone else's child is an act of generosity or guilt. Maybe for me it was both. I wanted to be her salvation. I didn't know I was just another stop on her way to something darker. Lena was like a small storm that never quite left the house. She didn't destroy things, she rearranged them, twisted them, made them unpredictable. Some days she'd run through the hallways laughing, her hair flying, her socks slipping across the tiles, and I'd think, this is what happiness sounds like. Other days she'd sit in the corner by the window, silent, tracing patterns on the glass as if waiting for something or someone I couldn't see. I began to realize that love, no matter how strong, doesn't always guarantee peace. Sometimes it just gives chaos a place to live. When she started school, her teachers said she was clever but restless. She's got a mind that runs faster than her mouth, one of them joked. I remember laughing too, even though I didn't understand it then. Later I learned that children, like her children with too much imagination, often use it as armor. They hide behind stories because reality feels too sharp. I read somewhere that playfulness in a child can be a form of rebellion, a refusal to be shaped by other people's grief. And maybe that's what Lena was doing, refusing to become my idea of a perfect daughter. Every morning she'd insist on wearing mismatched socks. They're not lost, she said, they're just not meant to be twins. I found that funny at first, even charming, but when she started painting on the walls with crayons, I scolded her. She stared at me, her big brown eyes full of defiance, and said, "The house looked sad. I made it happy. I couldn't stay angry. Maybe that was my mistake. I confused creativity with chaos and affection with forgiveness." She had a fascination with secrets. She'd whisper things to the cat hide coins under floorboards, and once she buried a toy in the garden and drew a map to find it again. I asked why. Because someday, she said, I'll forget where everything is, and I want something to remind me. I laughed, but a part of me shivered. Children shouldn't speak like they already know what forgetting feels like. There was one afternoon that stands out vividly. I was making soup in the kitchen when I heard her arguing with a neighbor's boy, Peter. I stepped outside just in time to see her push him into the mud. He cried, of course, and she just stood there, arms crossed. When I called her name, she looked at me and he said, "I don't have a real mom." The words hit like a slap, sharper than her tone. I told Peter to go home, then turned to Lena. "You do have a real mom," I said, "and she's standing right here." She didn't answer. She just walked past me, went inside, and slammed her bedroom door. That night, I found a note under my pillow. It said, "If you love me, you won't make me go back." I didn't understand what she meant. Go back where? To her old life, to the place that broke her. Maybe she didn't even know herself. People still debate whether adopted children ever truly feel like they belong, or if they spend their lives pretending to fit into a story that was written before them. We started having visitors, neighbors dropping in with gifts, church ladies offering advice, well-meaning strangers saying things like, "She's lucky to have you." I'd smile, but inside I wondered if I was the lucky one or the foolish one. One evening, a woman from the community center came to talk about behavioral boundaries. She said children test the walls of love. If the walls don't hold, they never stop pushing. That line stayed with me, though I didn't really know how to build stronger walls without making her feel trapped. Lena started playing with the idea of running away. Not seriously, at least not yet, but she'd make comments like, "If I ever leave, will you miss me?" Or, "Would you still keep my room?" I'd laugh and say, "You're not going anywhere." She'd grin and reply, "You never know." It felt like a joke, but it wasn't. It was practice. She was rehearsing the day she'd actually do it. Her playful nature wasn't just mischief, it was her language. When she wanted affection, she'd tease me. When she felt guilty, she'd tell a joke. Once she filled my teacup with glitter because she said I looked too serious. I was furious, but she laughed so hard that I ended up laughing too. Family psychologists say humor in children is often a survival instinct, a way to manage fear without naming it. That's the kind of thing you only understand years later, when the laughter's gone and the silence hurts more. One Sunday, we went to the park. She climbed trees barefoot, raced the wind, and returned with a crown of dandelions. "Look," she said, "I'm queen of nowhere." I asked why nowhere. She shrugged. "Because nobody fights over nowhere." I wanted to hug her then, but she ran off again. I watched her from the bench, her figure small against the setting sun, and I realized something strange. She was always halfway gone, even when she was right there. That night after she fell asleep, I walked through the house. The crayon drawings, the hidden coins, the toys scattered like breadcrumbs, they all made the house feel alive again. Yet beneath that warmth was a quiet dread. I couldn't shake the thought that her energy wasn't boundless joy, it was escape in disguise. I whispered to myself, she's just a child. But in the dark, that sounded less like comfort and more like a prayer. People still debate whether too much forgiveness can harm a child, make them believe love has no limits. I didn't know the answer then. I just knew that every time I saw her smile, my heart melted. And every time she turned away, I felt something tightening inside me, a fear I couldn't name. I thought I was raising her. But maybe from the very beginning, she was teaching me just how fragile love really is. The first lie came wrapped in innocence. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no shouting, just a quiet betrayal that slipped into our daily rhythm like a hairline crack in glass. I found out one evening when her teacher called. She's been taking small things, the woman said carefully, erasers, keychains, even a bracelet from another student. I felt my stomach twist. Not from anger, but from disbelief. I had told myself that love, stability, and a warm home could heal anything. Yet here it was, that faint echo of her past, returning like a ghost I thought I'd banished. I waited until she got home. She tossed her school bag onto the couch and started humming, pretending nothing was wrong. I could smell the faint mix of chalk dust and cheap perfume on her clothes, a scent I had come to associate with school days. "Lena," I said softly, "your teacher called." She froze, just for a second, but I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, like a curtain shifting in the wind. Then came the act. Tears welling up instantly, trembling lips, her voice cracking as she said, "I didn't do it. They're lying. I wanted to believe her. God, I needed to believe her." But the next morning, I found the missing bracelet inside her sock drawer. It had tiny blue beads, shaped like stars. I sat there holding it in my hand, feeling the weight of disappointment, not in her, but in myself. I had promised to protect her from everything, and now I realized I hadn't even protected her from herself. When I confronted her, she didn't cry this time. She looked at me with a coldness that felt unnatural for a child. "You think I'm like her, don't you?" she said quietly. I asked who she meant. "My mother," she replied. Her tone was steady, like she was testing me. I told her she wasn't. I told her she was loved. But she turned away and whispered, "You don't know her like I do." That was the first time I saw the line between us, not the one drawn by law or blood, but by something deeper. The difference between giving birth to someone and trying to rebirth them into a better life. And I began to wonder if that was even possible. People still debate whether nurture can ever completely rewrite nature. Some say it can. Others say our ghosts live in our genes. I didn't have an answer. I just knew I was losing something I never truly owned. After that, little things began to go missing at home, too. Coins from the jar, small trinkets, even a photo frame once. She always denied it, and I always wanted to believe her. The guilt of doubting your own child, adopted or not, is like swallowing glass. One night, I decided to test her. I placed a gold ring, one she'd admired before, on the counter and pretended to forget about it. The next morning, it was gone. I didn't ask. Neither did she. We just sat across the breakfast table, both pretending nothing had happened. Around that time, she started spending more time outside. I'd see her talking to older kids at the park, teenagers, who smoked and laughed too loud. When I called her home, she'd roll her eyes and say, "You're not my real mom." The first time she said it, I felt my knees go weak. But the worst part wasn't the words, it was how casually she said them, as if they were just another joke. At dinner, she'd make faces at me or refuse to eat unless I told her stories about my childhood. So I did. I told her about growing up poor, about how my father used to fix shoes to buy us school books. She listened silent, then asked, "So, you know what it's like to take things when you have nothing?" I froze. I didn't know whether to scold her or hold her. That night, I cried quietly in the kitchen, wondering if love was supposed to hurt this much. I talked to a family counselor once secretly. She said children like Lena often lie to test if love will still be there after. If you stop loving her because of the lie, she said, then the lie becomes her proof that she was right not to trust you. I wrote that down somewhere, but it didn't make it easier. Knowing the psychology doesn't soothe the ache of betrayal, it just gives it a name. One evening, I found Lena sitting on the porch, staring at the streetlights. "Do you ever lie?" she asked suddenly. I said, "Sometimes." when I don't want to hurt someone." She nodded. "That's what I do too." It wasn't an apology, it was philosophy. I remember thinking how strange it was for a 12-year-old to sound like a philosopher of pain. That week the police visited the neighborhood. There had been reports of petty thefts at the nearby market. Nothing major, just wallets, phone cases, food. When the officer came to our door to ask if we'd seen anything, Lena stood beside me holding my hand. She smiled politely, her other hand hidden in her pocket. Later that night, when I checked her room, I found a half-eaten chocolate bar still in its wrapper with a store security tag dangling from it. My heart sank not from anger, but from realization she didn't need things. She needed control. Control is a strange thing in families. Parents think they have it because they set the rules. But children, especially the ones who've known loss, know how to bend those rules quietly, how to make you question your own reality. I read somewhere that trust once cracked doesn't shatter, it leaks. That's what it felt like with her. The love was still there, but it kept dripping away one lie at a time. I didn't punish her for the chocolate bar. I just sat beside her bed watching her sleep, whispering, "We'll be okay." But deep down, I knew I was saying it to myself. People still debate whether unconditional love is strength or blindness. Maybe it's both. Because even after that first lie, I still looked at her the next morning and saw only my little girl, the one who once slept beside me with the hallway lights still on. Teenage years are supposed to be confusing, but with Lena, they were a storm I couldn't predict. She was 13 when everything began to tilt. Her laughter, once innocent, took on an edge. She started using words she didn't understand, wearing expressions that belonged to someone older. The sweetness in her voice faded into a practiced tone of indifference. I used to think growing up was just about learning. Now I know it's also about unlearning the warmth you once carried. It began small, rolling her eyes, ignoring chores, locking her door. I thought it was normal. Everyone told me teenagers need space. "Don't worry," one mother said at the grocery store, "they all turn into strangers for a while." But what no one tells you is how lonely that feels. How it's like losing someone in slow motion, watching them drift inch by inch, and realizing you can't hold them anymore. She started hanging around the wrong crowd. I'd see them outside the local gas station, kids with hoodies pulled low, passing cigarettes and secrets. One day I followed her quietly, pretending to browse at the corner store. I saw her laughing with them louder than she ever laughed with me. When she caught me watching, her face hardened. That night she didn't come home until midnight. When she finally walked in, I was waiting by the door. "Where were you?" I asked. She smirked. "Living." I told her I was worried that she was still a child. She scoffed. "I've been taking care of myself my whole life." That hit me harder than I expected, because part of it was true. Maybe I had tried so hard to protect her that I forgot she'd already survived things before I arrived. We fought more often after that. Words became weapons. Once I tried to ground her for skipping school, and she laughed right in my face. "You can't tell me what to do. You're not my real mother." The words landed like a slap. I stood there frozen, not because it was new, but because this time she said it with no guilt, no hesitation, like she finally believed it. The school called again, truancy fights, missing assignments. When I went to meet her teachers, they gave me that look, parents' dread pity mixed with judgment. One of them said, "She's smart, but she's angry. It's like she's at war with the world." I nodded, but inside I wondered if maybe she wasn't at war with the world. Maybe she was just at war with herself. At home, she started dressing differently. Dark clothes, heavy makeup, streaks of red in her hair. When I asked why, she said, "It's how I feel inside." I told her she didn't need to advertise her pain to be understood. She shrugged and said, "You never really understand me anyway." She was right. I didn't. I wanted her to be healed, and she wanted to be free. Those two things were never going to meet. I remember one night clearly. It was storming outside, rain pelting the windows, thunder rolling through the house. She came in, past curfew, soaked in shivering mascara running like ink. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She looked at me, eyes wild, and said, "I hate it here. I feel like a prisoner." I told her this was her home, her safe place. She laughed bitterly. "Safe for who, you or me?" We stood there facing each other, two silhouettes against the lightning. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You didn't save me. You just adopted my ghost." She ran upstairs, slammed her door, and for the first time I didn't follow. I just stood there, letting her words echo in the silence. People still debate whether adopted children carry inherited pain from their parents, if trauma can live in their bones, even when their hearts are given new homes. That night, I believed it could. Weeks later, I found out she'd been lying about where she was after school. She wasn't at the library. She was meeting someone, an older boy who drove a motorcycle and had that smug look that only trouble wears. I confronted her and she shouted, "He listens to me, you don't." I told her I was protecting her. She sneered. "You're just afraid I'll leave you like everyone else did." That night I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling, realizing she was right again. I was afraid, not just of losing her, but of what I'd become, someone clinging to love like it was a leash. I tried to bridge the gap between us. I started cooking her favorite meals, leaving little notes on her desk that said, "I'm proud of you," or "You're stronger than you think." Most of them went unread. One day I peeked into her room and saw she had torn them into tiny pieces. The only one left untouched said, "I'll always be here." I wondered if she kept it as a comfort or a warning. She started spending weekends away. Sometimes she'd tell me she was at a friend's house, but when I called, there was no answer. Once I found a hotel key card in her bag. When I asked about it, she rolled her eyes. "It's not mine." I wanted to believe that, but the perfume on it wasn't hers, it was mine. I realized she had taken it from my drawer, maybe to smell familiar, maybe to remind herself of control. Either way, I didn't ask again. People still debate whether rebellion is part of growing or part of breaking. I used to think it was just a phase. But with Lena, it wasn't a phase, it was her declaration of independence from everything that had ever tried to own her pain. And deep down, I began to understand that one day she wouldn't just rebel. She would leave. The night she left is burned into my memory with surgical precision, every sound, every shadow, every word that turned a home into an echo. It started like any other argument, the kind you think will blow over after a few hours. She was 17 then, tall, sharp, and beautiful in that reckless way only youth can be. She came home late again, smelling like smoke and rain, a jacket that wasn't hers hanging off her shoulders. I asked where she had been trying to sound calm, but my voice came out thin-cracked. She just laughed and said, "You're obsessed with me, you know that." That laughter, God, that cruel, careless laugh cut deeper than any insult could. It was the same sound she used when she wanted to make me small. I told her we needed to talk seriously. She rolled her eyes. "You always need to talk, but you never listen." Then she said something that made the air leave my lungs. "I'm leaving. For real this time." At first, I thought it was just another bluff, one of her dramatic flares of defiance. But she walked to her room, dragged out her suitcase, and began throwing clothes into it, no order, no hesitation. I stood in the doorway, frozen, watching my years of love get folded into a bag. "Where will you go?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't look up. "Anywhere but here." I begged her to stop. I told her the world was cruel, that she was too young, that people would take advantage of her kindness and beauty. She zipped up her suitcase and said, "Then I'll just stop being kind." There was no tremor in her voice, no second thoughts. That's when I knew this wasn't rebellion anymore, it was escape. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the windows like warning drums. I followed her down the stairs, my heart pounding. "Lena, please," I said, "don't do this. You're all I have." She stopped at the door, turned halfway, and for a split second, her eyes softened. I thought maybe she'd change her mind, but then she whispered, "That's the problem, isn't it? You made me your everything." And then she was gone. The door slammed, and with it, 17 years of effort, forgiveness, and fragile peace. I stood there in silence, listening to her footsteps fade into the night, the echo blending with the rain. I wanted to run after her, but something inside me froze. Maybe it was pride or fear, or the realization that chasing her now would mean losing myself completely. I sat on the stairs until dawn. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. Her room was half empty, the drawers left open, perfume still lingering in the air. On her desk, she had left one thing behind, a folded piece of paper. I opened it with trembling hands. It said, "Don't come looking for me. I'll find my own home." People still debate whether love is selfless or selfish. That night, I realized it's both. Because the kind of love that makes you adopt a child, pour your soul into them, and watch them walk away, that love isn't about control. It's about learning how to let someone go, even if they tear you apart doing it. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing. I called her friends, the police even checked hospitals. Nothing. Every morning, I'd make 2 cups of coffee out of habit, and every night I'd leave the hallway light on just in case she came back. The neighbors started whispering. Mrs. Hall said, "She'll be back when she's hungry." I smiled weakly, but I knew hunger wasn't what drove her. It was pride, and pride, I've learned, feeds on its own fire. I tried to stay busy. I repainted her room, replaced the broken lamp, started volunteering at the orphanage again. One little girl asked me, "Where's your daughter?" And I almost said, "She's gone." But the words didn't feel right. Gone is too final. Lena wasn't gone. She was somewhere, just not here. Sometimes at night I'd dream of her knocking on the door drenched in rain, whispering, "I'm sorry." I'd open my arms and she'd melt into them like she did when she was 8. But then I'd wake up to an empty hallway and realize it was just my heart playing tricks. That's the cruelest thing about missing someone. You start bargaining with your own imagination. One afternoon, about 2 months after she left, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end said, "You're listed as the guardian of Alina." My heart stopped. The woman explained she was from a shelter 2 towns over. "She's fine," she added quickly, "but she doesn't want to see anyone right now." Relief and heartbreak tangled together in my chest. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for hours staring at the wall. She was alive, but still unreachable. People still debate whether leaving home is an act of freedom or an act of running away. Maybe it's both. For her, it was liberation. For me, it was loss. I didn't know then that her leaving wasn't the end of our story. It was the prelude to something far more devastating. Because one day, long after I stopped waiting, she came back, and that's when the real tragedy began. Years stretch differently when you're waiting for someone who might never return. Time doesn't move in days or months. It drips slow and uneven like a leaking faucet you can't bring yourself to fix. After Lena left, the house became a hollow chest where every sound echoed too long. I learned to live among her absence, the untouched mug in the cupboard, the silent piano keys, the faint scent of her shampoo that refused to fade from her pillowcase. Every corner whispered a memory, and every memory demanded an explanation I couldn't give. At first, I expected her to come back within days. I cooked enough for 2, kept her favorite blanket folded on the couch, and left the porch light on. Each passing car made my heart leap. I even imagined her voice once so clearly that I called her name into the darkness. But it was just the wind brushing through the trees, mocking me softly. The neighbors stopped asking after a while. Pity is a short-lived courtesy. Eventually, even silence gets tired of comforting you. I tried to rebuild a life. I joined a book club, took long walks, and learned to bake bread from scratch. Because kneading dough is one of those simple grounding acts that tricks your brain into thinking everything can still be shaped. Yet in the quiet moments, I'd find myself talking to her out loud. "You'd like this," I'd say, while stirring soup, or "Remember when you painted that wall?" I wasn't talking to ghosts. I was talking to the version of her that still lived in my head, the child, not the stranger she became. There's something cruel about how memory works. It doesn't play fair. It edits, romanticizes lies. I started remembering her laugh more than her defiance, her hugs more than her tantrums. It's strange how love sharpens after loss, how it polishes the rough edges of pain until you start mistaking regret for tenderness. Psychologists call it selective nostalgia. I call it survival. I kept her room untouched for 2 years. The bed neatly made her drawings still taped to the walls, bright suns, crooked houses, and one sketch of us holding hands under a tree. I'd go and sometimes sit on the floor and read the notes she used to write, "Don't forget to smile. Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" And one that simply said, "I'm trying." That one broke me the most. I whispered, "Me too." On Sundays, I'd visit the orphanage again, not because I wanted to replace her, but because I wanted to remember why I had loved her in the first place. The director once told me some children are born with roots, others with wings. You can't blame them for flying. I smiled at that, but deep down I wondered, what if she had flown straight into a storm? People still debate whether love should be unconditional. I used to think it meant forgiving anything. Now I think it means hoping even when hope hurts. 3 years passed before I saw her name again. A letter came not from her, but from a government office. It was about her adoption records. They'd been requested. By her. My hands shook as I read it. She hadn't forgotten me. She wanted something, maybe her birth certificate, maybe closure, maybe, who knows? I signed the release and waited. But she didn't contact me. The silence returned heavier than before because now it wasn't just loss, it was rejection. Life went on in practical ways. I sold my car, adopted an old dog, started volunteering at a senior center. I filled my days with tasks so there'd be no space left for thought. But at night, she'd find me again. In dreams, she was always the same age she was when she left. Always running, always turning back once, just to see if I was following. I never caught up. I began to notice strange coincidences around the house. Small things missing again, a spoon, a book once, even a photo frame. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Then one morning, I found muddy footprints by the back door. My heart jumped. Was it her? Had she been here? I told myself it was probably the neighbor's kid or an animal, but something deep inside whispered otherwise. Months later, I saw her face. Not in person, on social media. A friend of a friend had tagged her in a photo. She was older, sharper, wearing sunglasses and a smirk that wasn't hers. The caption said she was traveling abroad somewhere in Europe. She looked happy, carefree, the kind of happy that makes you ache because you realize it doesn't include you. I didn't message her. I just stared at the photo for a long time, tracing the outline of her smile, wondering if she still remembered the woman who gave her that crooked front tooth after too many sweets. One evening, while cleaning the attic, I found the bracelet she once stole as a child, the one with tiny blue stars. I had forgotten I kept it. Holding it again brought a flood of memories and a single question: had I failed her, or had I simply been a chapter she was meant to outgrow? People still debate whether love is an act of saving or surrender. That night, I stopped debating. I sat there with the bracelet in my palm and whispered, "I hope you found what you were looking for." 5 years after she left, I finally turned off the hallway light. It felt like betrayal, like closing a door that had always been cracked open. The darkness didn't swallow me. It embraced me quietly, as if to say, "You've done enough." I thought that was the end. But one humid evening, when cicadas were screaming outside and the sky smelled of rain again, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, she was standing there. Older, thinner, her eyes a mix of exhaustion and calculation. She smiled faintly and said, "Hi, Mom. Can I come in?" And just like that, the storm started all over again. The first thing that hit me when I saw her again wasn't joy, it was disbelief. After 5 years of silence, the sight of her standing in my doorway felt almost unreal, like a memory that had wandered back from the dead. She was 22 now, dressed too well for someone with nowhere to be. Her hair was sleek, her nails manicured, and a faint perfume, expensive, unfamiliar, hung in the air around her. I froze for a moment, trying to reconcile the young woman in front of me with the girl who had once painted flowers on the walls. "Lena," I whispered, "you came back." She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't soften. "Of course I did," she said, stepping inside without waiting for me to invite her. Her tone was calm, too. Calm. The kind of calm that comes after a storm, not peace, but calculation. I closed the door, feeling the weight of it shut behind her. The house, long accustomed to silence, seemed to breathe differently now. "You look good," I managed. She smirked. "You look the same, maybe a little lonelier." I forced a laugh, but something in me tightened. The girl I had raised would have run into my arms. This woman looked like she was studying the place, taking inventory of everything she once left behind. We sat in the living room and I made tea. She took a sip and grimaced. "Still too sweet," she said, echoing her very first night in my house all those years ago. That small echo made my heart twist. Maybe she remembered more than I thought. "Where have you been?" I asked softly. "Around," she said vaguely. "You know, life happens." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. I just needed time to figure myself out. I nodded slowly, careful not to scare her off with too many questions. "You could have called," I said. She looked up sharply and said, "What?" "That I ran away from the only person who cared about me, that I didn't know how to love you back." Her voice cracked slightly before she composed herself again. "No, I couldn't do that. Not then." I wanted to believe that tremor in her tone meant she still cared, but her eyes, cold-guarded, told another story. Later that evening, we had dinner together. She asked about my health, about the neighbors, about whether I'd kept her room. I told her it was just as she left it. She smiled faintly. "I figured you would." After we ate, she wandered through the house, touching furniture, opening drawers, humming an old tune. "You didn't change much," she said, her fingers trailing across the piano keys. "I like that. It's comforting." But her expression wasn't comfort, it was control. She stayed the night, saying she was tired from traveling. I prepared her old room, even though the sheets were stiff with age. She stood in the doorway, glancing around. "Wow," she said. "I used to think this room was huge." I smiled. "You were small." She turned to me, eyes glinting. "Yeah, and you were stronger." I didn't know what she meant by that, and I didn't ask. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept listening to the creaks of the house, the faint sound of footsteps moving where they shouldn't. At one point, I thought I saw her shadow pass by my door. When I went to check, she was standing in the kitchen, opening the refrigerator. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She jumped slightly, then smiled. "Just hungry." "Don't worry, Mom." The word Mom slipped out too easily. It sounded rehearsed, not real. The next morning, she was already dressed, scrolling through her phone at the table. "I was thinking," she said between sips of coffee, "maybe I'll stay a few days. Get back on my feet, you know." My heart leapt. "Of course," I said. "This is your home." She smiled, but her eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway where my study was the same study where I kept important papers. I ignored the chill that crept up my spine. Over the next few days, she was polite, almost overly so. She cleaned the dishes, complimented my cooking, even accompanied me to the market once. The neighbors were shocked. Mrs. Hall said, "Well, look at that back from the dead." I laughed awkwardly, but Lena's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You know how it is," she said. "Family always finds its way back." The way she said family made me uneasy, as if it were just another performance. One afternoon, I found her in the attic, rummaging through boxes. "What are you doing up here?" I asked. "Just looking for memories," she said casually, holding an old photo album. "Do you ever miss Dad?" she asked suddenly, using the word for the first time in years. "Every day," I said, quietly. She nodded, flipping a page. "You know, it's funny. People always talk about family like it's blood, but you're the only one who actually treated me like it meant something." Her voice softened, almost genuine. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but she moved away before I could. That night, we watched an old movie together, just like we used to. For a moment, it almost felt normal again. She laughed at one of the scenes, leaned her head back, and said, "I miss this." My eyes stung. "Then why did you leave?" I asked quietly. The room went still. She stared at the screen for a long time before whispering, "Because I didn't know how to stay." I thought maybe that was the beginning of healing. I thought she had finally come home not just to my house, but to herself. People still debate whether forgiveness should come before understanding. I gave her both without asking for either. But looking back now, I see the signs I ignored. The unlocked drawers, the missing checkbook, the phone calls she took outside. She had returned, yes, but not to me. She had come back for something else entirely. And soon, I'd find out what. It happened so slowly that I almost didn't notice it at first, like a leak. You only hear once the floor beneath you starts to rot. After Lena came back, the house seemed full again, too full maybe. There were footsteps in the hallway, lights left on doors that never used to creak, suddenly waking up after years of stillness. For the first time in a long while, I heard laughter at breakfast. Humming in the kitchen, the sound of the piano late at night. It was as if life had returned to the walls, though it felt slightly off, like watching someone else's movie on mute. She told me she was looking for work, something flexible, maybe in event planning. I offered to help, but she shook her head. "I'll figure it out, Mom. I just need a little time." I didn't push. I was too afraid to lose her again. If she needed time, I'd give her time. If she needed space, I'd give her the whole world. That's what love does. It bargains with itself one piece at a time until there's nothing left but empty hands. At first, she spent her mornings running errands, her afternoons scrolling on her phone, her nights talking quietly on the porch. I didn't mind. I told myself it was healthy, normal. But soon, strange things started to happen. The first was small, a missing set of silver spoons. I thought I had misplaced them. Then it was a ring, one of the few keepsakes from my late husband. I tore the house apart looking for it, blaming myself for my failing memory. When I asked Lena if she had seen it, she tilted her head and said, "Maybe you just forgot where you put it, Mom." Her tone was casual, kind even, but something about the way she didn't look me in the eye stayed with me. One morning, I went to the bank to withdraw cash for groceries. The teller looked at me strangely and said, "You've been making quite a few withdrawals lately." My stomach dropped. "I haven't," I said quickly. She turned the screen to me. There they were, small amounts consistent, spread over several weeks, always just under the amount that would trigger a verification call. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't even ask who had made them. I just nodded, smiled, and said, "Oh, I must have forgotten." People still debate whether denial is self-protection or cowardice. I think it's both. That evening, I sat at the dining table staring at the framed photo of her 8th birthday, the one where she's grinning with frosting on her cheeks, my arm around her shoulder. I wanted to hold on to that version of her so badly that I convinced myself everything else was just a misunderstanding. Love, after all, is the art of explaining away pain. But the signs kept coming. She started taking more phone calls outside. Packages arrived and disappeared. I'd hear her laughing softly in the middle of the night, her voice hushed but excited. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, "Just a friend." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The next morning, she asked about the deed to the house. "You've kept it safe, right?" she said, pretending it was idle curiosity. I nodded. "Of course." She smiled faintly and said, "Good. I was just worried about you getting older and all. It should have sounded caring. It didn't." One day, I walked into my study to find her sitting at my desk, the computer screen glowing. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly. "I was just checking the Wi-Fi settings." But the browser history was still open bank account, property records, even a legal advice website. I froze, trying not to let the panic show on my face. She smiled, closed the laptop, and kissed my cheek. "You're too suspicious, Mom," she said lightly. I laughed, but my throat burned. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house felt sinister. I remembered the counselor from years ago saying children who fear abandonment often learn to survive by controlling others. Was that what she was doing? Controlling surviving? Or was I just a fool who couldn't admit she'd raised a thief? 2 weeks later, the storm finally broke. I came home from volunteering one afternoon to find the front door slightly ajar. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock it. But then I noticed the silence too clean, too deliberate. Her room was empty, drawers pulled open, closet bare, my jewelry box gone, the safe in the study open, the envelope with my husband's pension papers gone, too. I stumbled backward, breath shallow, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the police. When the officers arrived, they were polite but detached, taking notes as I listed everything missing. "Any idea who might have done this?" one asked gently. I hesitated. The words felt heavy, poisonous. "My daughter," I whispered. "She came back a month ago." The 2 officers exchanged a look I couldn't read. Part pity, part resignation. "We'll do what we can," one said. I nodded, knowing already they wouldn't find her. People vanish more easily than anyone wants to admit, especially when they've already practiced it once before. That night, I sat in her empty room, the one I'd kept sacred for so long. The walls seemed smaller, suffocating. I found a note on the floor, folded and half hidden under the bed. It said, "Don't be sad. I'm just taking what was always meant to be mine." The handwriting was elegant now, adult, almost mocking. I pressed it to my chest and sobbed until my ribs hurt. In the days that followed, the shock turned into routine. I canceled my cards, changed the locks, spoke to the bank. They confirmed the withdrawals were authorized using my own ID. Apparently, I'd visited several branches. When I looked at the security footage, I saw her, wearing my clothes, my glasses, even styling her hair like mine. She had impersonated me perfectly. My own reflection had robbed me. Neighbors whispered again. "She came back and did this, matin," Ms. Hall asked one morning, shaking her head. Poor thing, she must have been desperate. I wanted to scream, "Don't pity her," but I couldn't, because part of me still wanted to protect her, to shield her from the world's judgment, even as she dismantled everything I had. That's the paradox of motherhood. You can see the knife and still hold out your hand. Weeks passed before the pain dulled into numbness. I packed away what little remained, untouched old letters, photos, the worn teddy bear she used to sleep with. The police never found her. One officer called months later to say she'd likely left the country. Maybe she had someone helping her. Maybe she didn't. I didn't ask. I didn't want details anymore. Details make grief heavier. One afternoon, I sat with an old friend who asked the question everyone eventually asks. "Do you hate her?" I thought for a long time before answering. "No," I said. "Hate would mean I still expect something from her. I don't." My friend sighed. "Then what do you feel?" I stared out the window. "Empty," I said, "like the house after the storm." People still debate whether forgiveness is for the one who caused the pain or the one who carries it. I think forgiveness is just a word we use when we can't afford to keep bleeding. I forgave her not because she deserved it, but because I couldn't survive the alternative. Months later, a letter arrived from a foreign address. No return name, just an envelope with my name scrawled in her handwriting. Inside was a single photograph Lena standing on a beach, somewhere smiling. On the back, she had written, "You taught me everything I needed to know. Don't wait for me anymore." I sat on the porch that evening, the letter in my lap, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The house was silent again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt final, like a story that had already decided its own ending. And yet, as the first stars appeared, I found myself whispering to the night, if you ever need to come home, the light's still on. Because love, no matter how much it's betrayed, still has that one blind spot it never truly learns. That's when I understood something people rarely admit. Sometimes the person who destroys your life is the same person who once gave it meaning. When the police closed the file, they called it an unsolved domestic incident. I called it a hollow victory. They'd come ask questions, dusted for prints, and left behind the faint smell of latex gloves and coffee. No forced entry, no struggle, no witnesses. Just my signature on the report and the echo of my own name on official paper. I remember one officer trying to sound kind when he said, "Ma'am, sometimes people like that don't want to be found." I smiled politely because if I didn't, I would have screamed. He was right. She didn't want to be found, not by me, not by anyone who still remembered who she used to be. At first, I thought the worst part would be the silence, but it wasn't. It was the noise that followed, the gossip, the speculation, the pity disguised as curiosity. Neighbors who had once smiled politely now whispered when I passed. "She took everything, even the inheritance." Well, that's what happens when you raise someone else's child. Those words stung more than they should have. I knew people could be cruel, but I didn't expect them to sound so certain, like they had known all along this would happen. I started hearing stories, rumors really, that she'd been spotted in different places. A woman matching her description had opened a boutique in another town. Someone claimed to have seen her at an airport boarding a flight to Spain. Another said she was living with a man much older than her, maybe the same one she used to talk to on the phone. I didn't know what to believe, and maybe that was the point. Rumors have a way of replacing truth when the truth hurts too much. I visited the police station once more, hoping they'd found something. The detective, a tired-looking man with too many files on his desk, sighed as he flipped through mine. "There's been no new activity on her accounts," he said. Whoever helped her knew what they were doing. He paused, then added, "You know it's rare for cases like this to end with recovery. People like her." He caught himself mid-sentence. "They're resourceful." I nodded. She always was. He gave me a sympathetic look and said something I'll never forget. "You can't fix what doesn't want to be fixed." It sounded harsh, but it was true. I had spent years trying to fill her emptiness with my love, only to realize that sometimes love is just another thing to take. Back home, the house felt foreign. I kept expecting her to walk through the door again the way she had before. I even left the porch light on for a while, but it began to feel foolish. Each time I turned it off, though, guilt clawed at me like I was abandoning her all over again. So I compromised. I left a small lamp on by the window instead, a quiet beacon small enough to forget but bright enough to remember. Then came the calls. Unknown numbers sometimes in the middle of the night. I'd answer, and there'd be nothing but static or breathing. Once a woman's voice said my name barely above a whisper, "Mom." Then the line went dead. I called the number back, but it was disconnected. My heart wanted to believe it was her, but my mind said it was just another cruel joke of the universe. A few months later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a local paper in Lisbon, Portugal. The article was about a young woman arrested for credit card fraud. The photo was grainy, but I knew that face. The same eyes, the same set of her jaw. I read the article over and over, every word cutting deeper. She had been released on bail, her whereabouts unknown. No mention of family, no one came for her. No one but me reading about her across oceans, holding a clipping like a relic of a life that kept slipping through my hands. People still debate whether redemption is something we earn or something we accept. I wanted to believe she could still change, that the girl who once whispered "I don't want to die" under the hallway light still lived somewhere inside her. But the more I searched, the more I realized redemption is only possible for those who stop running. And she was born running. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild. I joined a community garden, started attending church again, and even made new friends who didn't know my story. But it always crept in the questions, the shame, the self-blame. Once a woman at church told me I was so brave for forgiving. I smiled, but inside I wanted to say I haven't forgiven her. I've just run out of ways to keep hating her. Then one evening, the doorbell rang. A young man stood there holding a small package. "Your Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. I nodded cautiously. "This was left at our hostel months ago. A woman said if we ever found you to give it to you." He handed it over and walked away before I could ask more. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was my husband's gold ring, the one that had vanished years ago. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper with one sentence written in her handwriting. I didn't keep everything. I sank into a chair, tears blurring the ink. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was something, a breadcrumb on the long trail of our broken bond. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was her way of saying goodbye. Or maybe she just wanted me to know she could take, and she could also return. People still debate whether closure is something we find or something we invent. That night, I decided it didn't matter. Closure, like forgiveness, is just a shape we give to pain when we're tired of its chaos. Word spread fast in town. Someone said she'd sent me money from overseas. Another claimed she was dying. I didn't correct them. Let them talk. I'd lived too long under their pity to care anymore. Truth had become irrelevant. Peace was all I wanted. But one rumor in particular haunted me. A woman from the bank said a large sum of money had been deposited into my account anonymously. It came from an international transfer, she said. "Would you like to investigate the sender?" I hesitated. Every cell in my body wanted to know, but I told her no. If it was her way of saying, I won. If it wasn't, I didn't want to ruin the illusion. That night, I sat by the window watching the world outside blur into twilight. I realized I had become two people, the one who still loved her, and the one who had finally let her go. I didn't know which one would wake up tomorrow. A few weeks later, I dreamed of her again. In the dream, she was standing in the garden, older, calmer, planting seeds in the dirt. I called her name, and she looked up, smiling. "It grew," she said, pointing to a small green sprout. "You just had to wait long enough. When I woke, I went outside and found nothing but weeds. Still, I knelt down, dug my fingers into the soil, and whispered, 'Maybe someday.' People still debate whether love has limits. I used to think it didn't, that real love could survive anything. But now I think love just changes shape when it's wounded. It becomes quieter, softer, something like acceptance. It stops asking for what it will never get. In the years that followed, I learned to live again, though not as before. I traveled once to Lisbon, of all places. Not to find her, but to see the ocean she had stood before in that photograph. The waves were wild that day, throwing salt into the air, crashing like applause. I stood there, eyes closed, and said, "If you're out there, I forgive you." A breeze lifted, then warm and strange, brushing past my face like a reply. Maybe that's all we get in the end. A feeling, not an answer. Maybe that's how parents survive the unthinkable, by learning to love their ghosts in silence. When I came home, I put the ring she'd returned into a small glass box and placed it on the shelf. Every now and then, I take it out, turn it in my hand, and wonder if she ever looks at the sky and thinks of me. And though the world still whispers about her, about me, about what happened, I've stopped correcting their stories. Because our truth, isn't something anyone else could carry. I don't remember the exact moment when the ache inside me began to soften. It didn't happen all at once. Pain rarely leaves dramatically. It fades like an echo in a long hallway, still audible but too distant to reach you anymore. For years, Lena's shadow followed me everywhere, through every sound of closing doors, every passing girl with her walk, her hair, her defiance. But one morning, I woke up, and for the first time in years, I made coffee without setting out 2 cups. The air felt still calm, like the house was finally learning to breathe again. That's when I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was simply living. The seasons had cycled through their moods, 5 winters, 5 springs since she vanished for the second and final time. In that span, I had aged in ways the mirror couldn't quite explain. My hair grayed, my hands grew frailer, but what truly changed was the way I saw the world. Before Lena, I believed love was a transaction: give enough and you'll get something back. But after her, I learned love is more like an inheritance. It's not something you can demand. It's something you leave behind, hoping someone will someday find it valuable. Forgiving her wasn't easy. It wasn't even deliberate. It was more like erosion, the sharp edges of anger slowly worn down by time and exhaustion. At first, forgiveness felt impossible. Every time I thought of her betrayal, I'd feel that raw sting of humiliation all over again. I'd remember the officer's pity, the neighbor's whispers, the sight of the empty safe. But eventually, even anger becomes boring. You can only replay the same scene so many times before the script loses its power. So I started forgiving her in fragments. I forgave her for the little girl who never got to grow up right. I forgave her for the woman who didn't know how to stay. I forgave her because she was the only one who ever made the house feel alive, even if it was chaos. And most painfully, I forgave her because I still loved her, because part of me always would. One day, while cleaning out old drawers, I came across something unexpected, a stack of letters from the adoption agency. Among them was one I'd never opened, dated a few months after I first brought her home. It was from her biological mother, written from prison. Her handwriting was messy, uneven, full of regret. She wrote, "If she ever asks about me, tell her I loved her. Tell her I never meant to let her go." But some people are born with storms inside them, and mine just never stopped. I sat with that letter for a long time, my hands trembling as I read and reread the words. For years, I had painted her mother as a villain in my mind, a shadowy figure of neglect and abandonment. But in that moment, she became real, human, broken, just like her daughter. Maybe Lena wasn't born bad. Maybe she just inherited too much pain too early. People still debate whether suffering passes through blood like an invisible heirloom. I believe it does. And I believe that by trying to love her, I became part of that chain, passing on my own quiet grief in return. After that day, something in me changed. I started speaking to Lena out loud again, not in longing, but in peace. You did what you had to do, I'd say, while watering the plants or feeding the dog. I did what I could. It wasn't a conversation, but a soft ritual. Closure dressed in kindness. Years later, on a warm autumn afternoon, I received a call from a foreign number. The voice on the line was unfamiliar accented. "Is this Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm calling from a clinic in Marseille," he continued. "A woman was admitted here a few days ago. She gave your name as her next of kin." My chest tightened. "What's her name?" I whispered, though I already knew. "Lena," he said. "She's stable but very weak." The world tilted. My knees almost gave out. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I was terrified or relieved. I packed that same night passport documents, a photo of her as a child, and boarded the first flight I could find. The plane felt suspended outside of time. Every cloud we passed looked like an unopened memory. When I finally saw her, I barely recognized her. She was thin, pale, her once glossy hair cut short, her eyes sunken but still defiant. A nurse said she'd been living under a different name, working at a cafe by the port. She'd collapsed one morning, malnutrition and exhaustion. When I entered her room, she turned her head weakly, eyes widening in disbelief. "You came," she whispered. I sat beside her, my hands trembling. "Of course I came," I said. Her lips twitched into a faint smile. "I didn't think you would." I laughed softly. "You never really knew me, did you?" She blinked, tears forming. "I thought I did. I thought love was something you could steal." We talked for hours quietly, gently, the way two people talk when they know they're running out of time. She told me she'd traveled, lied, stolen, loved, and lost. Everywhere I went, she said I kept hearing your voice. Not in my head, like literally. I'd be in a market or a cafe and I'd swear I heard you say my name. I'd look around, but of course you weren't there. She paused. "I hated you for that, for haunting me." I smiled through tears. Maybe it wasn't haunting. Maybe it was just love refusing to die. That night, she fell asleep holding my hand the first time she'd reached for me in more than a decade. Her pulse was faint but steady. I stayed by her side, watching her chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a borrowed miracle. I don't know when I drifted off, but when I woke, the sunlight was spilling through the window, warm and merciful. She was gone. Peaceful, almost smiling. People still debate whether the soul feels forgiveness in its final moments. I like to think she did. After the funeral, I took her ashes back home. I buried them under the old oak tree she used to stare at from her bedroom window. The one I told her could live for 100 years. I whispered, "You made it, baby. You found your way home." In the weeks that followed, I found myself talking about her more openly, to friends, to strangers, even to the woman at the grocery store. Not with shame or sadness, but with gratitude. She was complicated, I'd say, but she was mine. Sometimes people would tilt their heads sympathetically, unsure whether to call that tragic or beautiful. I never corrected them, because it was both. As for me, I learned that forgiveness isn't about erasing pain, it's about accepting that love and betrayal can coexist in the same story. That's what makes it human. I still keep her ring, her photo, and the letter from her mother in a box by my bedside. Some nights I open it and think about all the women in our tangled chain, her mother, her and me, 3 generations bound by love, loss, and longing. Maybe that's what family truly is. Not perfection, but persistence. People still debate whether wounds can ever truly heal or if they just learn to stop hurting. I don't know. I just know that when the wind passes through the house at night, it feels like she's still here, laughing, softly teasing, leaving traces of perfume in the air. So if you're listening to this now, wherever you are, remember this. Love doesn't always look like saving someone. Sometimes it looks like forgiving them quietly, even when they're gone. And to my Lena, wherever your soul drifts tonight, I forgive you. I hope you finally forgive yourself too. Hey guys, if you've stayed with me until the end, thank you for being here tonight. You probably felt every word with me, and I hope it touched you somewhere deep where memory and mercy meet. If stories like this resonate with you, take a moment to subscribe, leave a comment, or just tell me if you've ever loved someone you couldn't keep. Now turn off the lights. Let this story fade like a gentle hum in your chest. Remember, forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a quiet place we build inside ourselves. Good night.